The Velrani had been watching Earth for 300 years. Their stations floated behind the moon, hidden from human eyes, recording everything. They watched humans build cities and burn them down. They watched humans create beautiful art and terrible weapons. They watched humans love each other and kill each other, sometimes on the same day. Ambassador Torin had spent 40 years studying these strange creatures. He had written 17 reports for the Galactic Coalition. In every single one, he said the same thing. Humans are interesting, he would say, but they are not important. The Coalition agreed with him. Why would they care about humans? Humans were new to space. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel 80 years ago. Their ships were slow and ugly. Their weapons were weak. They fought among themselves like children fighting over toys. The Coalition had existed for 10,000 years. They had seen hundreds of species rise and fall. Humans were just another young race that would probably destroy itself before it became anything special. Torin believed this completely. He had no reason to think otherwise. Then the Kath came. The Kath Dominion was not like the Coalition. The Coalition believed in peace and trade and cooperation. The Kath believed in conquest. They were tall and powerful, with hard shells covering their bodies like armor. They had conquered 11 species in 200 years. They turned free peoples into slaves. They took everything they wanted and destroyed everything else. When the Kath turned their eyes toward Coalition space, Torin felt fear for the first time in his long life. The Velrani Council met in their great chamber, surrounded by floating screens that showed Kath warships moving closer every day. They calculated their options with cold logic. They could fight and lose 40% of their people, or they could negotiate and lose only their outer colonies. They chose negotiation. Torin watched his leaders sign away 7 worlds in the first year, 12 more in the second. Millions of Velrani became Kath slaves. The other Coalition species did nothing. The Morath, with their crystal bodies, stayed silent. The Deloni, who lived in water, hid in their ocean planets. The ancient Sirithi closed their borders and pretended nothing was happening. Self-preservation was the highest law of civilized species, or so they all believed. Nobody thought to ask the humans for help. Why would they? Humans were primitives. They had one homeworld and a few small colonies. Their total population was nothing compared to the great Coalition species. What could they possibly do against the Kath? Park Yuna was 26 years old when the Kath found humanity. She was a lieutenant in the United Earth Defense Force, stationed on a colony called Kepler 442b. It was a beautiful world, with purple forests and 3 small moons. Yuna had joined the military to pay for university. She wanted to be a teacher someday. She had never fired her weapon outside of training. She was eating dinner when the alarm started screaming. Yuna ran to the observation deck with the other soldiers. Through the big windows, she could see the sky changing. Dark shapes were dropping through the clouds. Ships, dozens of them. They were black and smooth, shaped like knives cutting through the air. What are those? Someone asked. Nobody answered. Nobody knew. Then the message came. It played on every screen, every speaker, every device on the planet. A Kath commander stared at them with cold, empty eyes. You are now property of the Kath Dominion, the message said. Surrender immediately. Resistance will result in total destruction. You have 1 hour to comply. Yuna stood very still. Around her, people were crying. Some were praying. Some were already running, though there was nowhere to run to. But Yuna did not cry. She did not pray. She did not run. Something old woke up inside her. Something that her ancestors had carried through centuries of struggle. Something that had survived occupations and wars and disasters that should have broken her people forever. It was not fear. It was anger. Far away, in his hidden station behind the moon, Ambassador Tarn watched the Kath arrive at the human colony. He felt sorry for the humans. They were about to learn what every species learned when they met the Kath. Resistance was pointless. Surrender was the only logical choice. He expected the humans to give up within hours. Every other species did. Instead, something strange happened. The human commander was an old man named Admiral Cho Daesung. He had gray hair and a face full of wrinkles and scars. He had fought in wars that Tauren had never heard of, on a planet the Coalition considered unimportant. When the Keth demanded surrender, Admiral Cho smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had been waiting for something his whole life and had finally found it. "This is Admiral Cho Daesung of the United Earth Defense Force," he said, broadcasting his response to the Keth and to his own people. "To the Keth Dominion, we have received your message. We have considered your terms." He paused. The whole colony was watching. The whole coalition was watching, though the humans did not know it. "Our answer is no. Silence. We will not surrender our world. We will not surrender our people. We will not bow to slavers and murderers who think they can take whatever they want." His voice grew harder. "You want this planet? Come and take it. But understand this. Every meter of ground will cost you blood. Every building will be a fortress. Every man, woman, and child on this world would rather die free than live as your slaves." He leaned forward, and his eyes burned with something the Keth had never seen before. "You picked the wrong species." The transmission ended. Torrance stared at his screen. His hands were shaking. In 40 years of studying humans, he had never seen anything like this. "They're insane," he whispered. "They cannot possibly win. The mathematics are clear. They will all die." But even as he said it, he felt something strange in his chest, an emotion his species had evolved past long ago. An emotion he did not have a name for. On Kepler 442b, Lieutenant Park Yuna stood at her post and watched the Keth ships descend. Around her, soldiers were preparing for battle. They were checking weapons, building barricades, helping civilians reach the underground shelters. Nobody was surrendering. Nobody was giving up. A sergeant handed Yuna a rifle. It was heavier than the training weapons. "It was real. You know how to use this?" he asked. Yuna nodded. Her hands were steady. "Good," the sergeant said. "Because those things up there, they've never fought humans before. They don't know what we're capable of." He looked up at the dark ships filling the sky. "They're about to find out." Yuna looked at the aliens descending on her world. She thought about her mother, safe on Earth. She thought about the students she would never teach. She thought about all the things she might never do. Then she pushed those thoughts away. She was a soldier now. Her home was under attack. And she was not going to run. Above the planet, the Keth prepared their invasion force. They expected this to be easy. They expected the humans to fight for a few hours and then break, like every other species. They did not know that humans had been fighting wars for 10,000 years. They did not know that humans had survived ice ages and plagues and disasters that should have destroyed them. They did not know that humans had looked into the darkness again and again and again and had always found a way forward. They did not know any of this, but they were about to learn. Commander Jaiketh had conquered 6 worlds for the Keth Dominion. He had broken armies and crushed rebellions. He had turned proud species into obedient slaves. He knew exactly how war worked. First, you showed overwhelming force. Then, you destroyed their military. Then, you took control of their cities. Finally, you broke their spirit until they accepted their new lives as property. It was simple. It was efficient. It always worked. The human colony would be no different. Jaiketh's fleet outnumbered their defense forces 20 to 1. His soldiers were giants, standing 3 meters tall, their bodies covered in natural armor that could stop most weapons. They were bred for war, trained from birth to kill. Humans were small, soft, fragile. They would break like all the others. The first wave of Kath soldiers landed outside the main city at dawn. 2,000 warriors, the best of the Dominion, armed with weapons that could melt steel and turn stone to glass. They expected terrified civilians running in the streets. They expected weak soldiers throwing down their weapons. They expected surrender. What they found was silence. The city was empty. No people, no vehicles, no movement at all. Just empty buildings and quiet streets and a strange stillness that made even the Kath warriors feel uneasy. "Where are they?" a soldier asked. Commander Kath checked his sensors. They showed life signs underground, deep below the city. The humans had fled into tunnels that the Kath sensors could not fully map. Something in the rocks was blocking their equipment. "Cowards," Kath said. "They're hiding like animals. Send teams to find the tunnel entrances. Smoke them out." His soldiers spread through the city. They kicked down doors and searched buildings. They found food still warm on tables, toys left on floors, lives interrupted in the middle of ordinary moments. Then the first explosion shook the ground. A building collapsed on top of a Kath patrol. 20 soldiers buried under tons of rubble. Before the dust settled, weapons fired from windows that had looked empty moments before. Human soldiers appeared from nowhere, shot their targets, and vanished into shadows. The Kath fired back with their superior weapons. They hit buildings, streets, vehicles. But the humans were already gone. "They're using the tunnels," Kath realized. "The whole city is connected underground. They're moving beneath our feet. More explosions. More attacks from unexpected directions." The Kath were used to enemies who stood and fought or ran and hid. These humans did both at the same time. They appeared, attacked, and disappeared before the Kath could respond. Private Kan Minho was 19 years old. He had grown up on Earth, in a small town where his grandmother told stories of the old days. She told him about a time when their country was occupied by invaders, when their language was forbidden, when their culture was being erased. She told him how their people had resisted, not with armies, because they had no armies, but with spirit, with stubbornness, with a refusal to give up even when giving up was the sensible choice. "There are worse things than dying," she used to say. "Living without freedom is one of them." Minho thought about his grandmother as he crawled through the narrow tunnel. His squad was gone. All of them. The Kath had caught them in an ambush, and Minho had only survived because he had fallen into a drainage pipe. He was alone. His rifle was empty. He had only one weapon left. The explosive vest was heavy against his chest. Every soldier had been given one, just in case. The commanders had not ordered anyone to use them, but they had made sure everyone had the choice. Minho found a ventilation shaft that led up into a building. He could hear Kath voices above. Many of them. He climbed. He came up in what looked like a command center. Kath officers surrounded tables covered with maps and screens. They were planning the next phase of their attack, deciding how to kill more of his people. They saw him at the same moment he saw them. For one heartbeat, nobody moved. A small human, covered in dirt and blood, standing among giants in armor. Then Minho smiled. It was his grandmother's smile. The smile of someone who has already won, even if no one else knows it yet. "This is for Kepler," he said. He pressed the button. The explosion killed 47 Kath officers, including 3 of Kath's senior commanders. It destroyed their communication equipment and their battle plans. It left a crater in the middle of their operation. And it sent a message that echoed across the planet. We will not break. We will not bow. We would rather die on our feet than live on our knees. Ambassador Torin watched the footage from his station, his whole body trembling. He had studied humans for 40 years. He thought he understood their violence. But this was something else. "They're not supposed to do that," he said to his assistant. "Intelligent species don't sacrifice themselves. Not like this. Not willingly. Not with smiles on their faces." His assistant, a young Velrani named Saren, looked equally disturbed. "Perhaps they are more primitive than we thought." "No," Torin said slowly. "No, I don't think that's it at all." He watched more footage. Humans fighting in ways that made no tactical sense. Soldiers charging positions they could not possibly take, buying time for civilians to escape. Medics running into fire to save wounded comrades. Ordinary people picking up weapons and joining the battle. "They know they're going to lose," Torin said. "The mathematics haven't changed. The Kath have more ships, more soldiers, more weapons. The humans cannot win this war. Then why do they keep fighting?" Torin did not answer. He did not have an answer. On Kepler 442b, the battle continued for days. The Kath brought more soldiers. The humans found more ways to kill them. Tunnels collapsed on Kath patrols. Bombs exploded under Kath vehicles. Snipers picked off Kath officers from buildings that sensors said were empty. Lieutenant Park Yuna had not slept in 3 days. Her uniform was torn and stained with blood that was not all hers. She had killed 17 Kath soldiers. She had watched friends die in her arms. She had done things that would haunt her dreams forever. But she had not given up. None of them had. Commander Jaikath stood in his ship, staring at reports he did not understand. He had lost 800 soldiers in 1 week. 800. Against a colony of farmers and teachers and workers who had never fought a real war. "How?" he demanded. "How are they doing this?" His analyst, a thin Kath with quick eyes, pulled up historical data. "Sir, I've been studying their species. Their history. It's unusual. Explain. They have been fighting wars for their entire recorded existence. 10,000 years of continuous conflict. They have more experience with combat than any species we have encountered. More than any species in the coalition. Perhaps more than any species ever." Jaikath stared at the data. Wars. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Humans fighting humans. Again and again, with every weapon they could create. "They are savages," he said. "Yes, sir. But they are very good at being savages." Jaikath looked down at the planet. Fires were burning in the city. His soldiers were still fighting, still dying. And the humans were still there, still resisting, still refusing to accept the inevitable. For the first time in his career, Commander Jaikath felt something he had never felt before. Doubt. Far away, the Galactic Coalition watched and worried. The Kath were supposed to conquer the humans quickly and move on. Instead, the war was growing. More Kath ships were arriving. More human colonies were preparing to fight. "This is getting dangerous," said a Morth counselor, her crystal body flickering with concern. "If the Kath become too focused on the humans, they might delay their expansion. We might have time to prepare our own defenses." "Or," said a Deloni representative, his voice bubbling through water, "the humans might make the Kath angry enough to destroy everything in their path." They argued about what to do. They talked about sending messages, offering help, trying to negotiate. But in the end, they did nothing. Because doing nothing was safe. Doing nothing was sensible. Doing nothing was what civilized species did. They did not understand that nothing was about to change. On Earth, leaders met in emergency sessions. News of Kepler 442b had spread across all human worlds. People were afraid, but they were also angry. The aliens had attacked their colony, had killed their people, had demanded that humans bow down and become slaves. The answer, when it came, was not decided by governments or generals. It was decided by ordinary people who looked at the stars and made a choice. They would fight, not because they knew they could win, but because surrender was not in their nature, because freedom meant more than safety, because they would rather face the darkness than live in it. Across human space, factories began producing weapons. Shipyards started building warships. Young people lined up to join the military. The Kath had awakened something they did not understand, and they were about to discover what that meant. The war was supposed to last 3 months. The Kath had calculated everything. They knew how many ships humans had. They knew how many soldiers. They knew the locations of every colony, every factory, every military base. Their computers had run thousands of simulations. In every simulation, humans surrendered within 90 days. But 3 months passed, and humans did not surrender. 6 months passed, and they were still fighting. A full year passed, and something impossible was happening. Humans were winning. Not everywhere. Not always. The Keth still had more ships, more soldiers, more resources. They could destroy any human fleet in open battle. They could bomb any planet into rubble. But humans refused to fight open battles. They refused to defend planets the way other species did. Instead, they did something the Keth had never seen before. They adapted. Captain Shin Yoonji had been a combat engineer before the war. She built bridges and roads and buildings. She knew how things were put together, which meant she knew how to take them apart. When the Keth invaded her colony, she did not run or hide. She gathered survivors and led them into the forests. They had few weapons, little food, and no hope of rescue. Within 6 months, her group had become the most feared fighting force on the planet. They called themselves the Dakabi, after the goblin spirits from old stories. Creatures that appeared from nowhere, caused chaos, and vanished before anyone could catch them. The Keth learned to fear the name. Yoonji taught her soldiers to fight dirty. They poisoned water supplies that the Keth used. They planted explosives on roads. They stole Keth weapons and figured out how to use them. They turned the aliens' own technology against them in ways that should not have been possible. How did you do that? Asked a young soldier named Hong Taemin, watching Yoonji connect stolen Keth power cells to human rifles. The result was a weapon that could punch through Keth armor like paper. Yoonji smiled. It was a cold smile, the kind that came from too many battles and too many lost friends. Their technology isn't magic. It follows rules. Figure out the rules, and you can break them. But we don't have scientists. We don't have laboratories. We don't need them. Humans have been taking things apart and putting them back together for thousands of years. It's what we do. She finished her work and tested the weapon on a nearby tree. The tree exploded into splinters. The Kath have been conquering species for 200 years, Yoonji said. Every species they met was afraid of their technology, afraid of things they didn't understand. So they never tried to understand. She handed the weapon to Taemin. We're not afraid. We're curious. And that's why we're going to win. Commander Jaikath was no longer in charge of the human war. He had been removed after too many failures. The new commander was a female Kath named Vekris, the most decorated officer in the Dominion. She had studied human tactics for months. She had read every report, watched every battle recording, analyzed every failure. And she had finally understood something terrifying. They're not fighting the same war we are, she told the Dominion Council. We're trying to conquer them. They're trying to destroy us. The Council did not understand. All species resist conquest. This is nothing new. You're wrong, Vekris said. Other species resist until resistance becomes too costly. Then they calculate the odds, accept defeat, and try to survive under our rule. Humans are different. She showed them data. Human casualty rates. Human attacks that made no tactical sense. Human soldiers choosing death over capture. They don't care about winning individual battles. They don't even care about surviving. They care about making us bleed. Every ship we lose, every soldier we bury, every month this war continues. That's victory for them. Then we destroy their worlds, a counselor suggested. Turn their planets to ash. End them completely. We could, Vekris agreed. But we would lose a third of our fleet doing it. And there are other species watching. Species who might decide that if the Kath can be hurt, the Kath can be beaten. Silence filled the chamber. The Kath Dominion had been built on fear. If that fear cracked, everything would fall apart. Ambassador Torin had stopped writing reports. He spent all his time watching the war, trying to understand what he was seeing. The coalition was paralyzed with confusion. Their models of species behavior did not include anything like humans. Every intelligent species they knew followed the same patterns. They valued survival above all else. They calculated costs and benefits. They surrendered when fighting became pointless. Humans broke every rule. Torin watched a recording of a battle on a human colony called Nova Sol. The Kath had landed overwhelming forces. Victory was certain. Then the humans did something strange. They set their own city on fire. Everything they had built, everything they owned, they destroyed rather than let the Kath have it. They burned their homes, their farms, their factories. They retreated into the wilderness, taking nothing but weapons and anger. The Kath won the battle. They captured an empty, smoking ruin. They would rather destroy everything than let us have it, Vekris reported. They would rather their children grow up with nothing than grow up as slaves. Lieutenant Park Yuna had survived the first year of the war. She was no longer a lieutenant. She was a commander now, leading a task force of fast attack ships. She had earned her rank with blood and sacrifice and a stubborn refusal to die. Her ship, the Guishin, was small and ugly. It had been a cargo vessel before the war. Now it was covered in armor plates and weapons salvaged from Kethrex. It was not powerful, but it was fast and sneaky, and Yuna had learned to use every advantage. She was in a meeting with Admiral Cho when the message came. The old man had aged 10 years and 12 months. His hair was white, his face was tired, but his eyes were still sharp. "We have a problem," he said. "The Kath are building a staging base at Kepler 442b. If they finish it, they'll have a permanent position in our territory. We'll never push them out." Yuna felt something cold in her stomach. Kepler 442b, her colony, the place where everything had started. Can we stop them? Not with what we have here. Our main fleet is defending Earth. If we pull ships away, we leave ourselves open to attack. Then we attack with what we have. Admiral Cho shook his head. "Commander, I appreciate your courage. But we would be outnumbered 50 to 1. It would be suicide." "Maybe," Yuna said. "But if we don't try, we've already lost." She pulled up star charts, showing the route to Kepler 442b. Her mind was already calculating possibilities, finding weaknesses, planning attacks. "The Kath expect us to be logical," she said. "They expect us to calculate odds and make safe choices. That's what every other species does. But we're not every other species. You're suggesting we do something stupid. I'm suggesting we do something human." Admiral Cho was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the star chart, at the impossible odds, at the young commander who had survived more than anyone should. Then he smiled. It was the same smile he had given when the Kath first arrived. The smile of a man who had stopped being afraid a long time ago. "Gather the fleet," he said. "We're taking back Kepler. Across human space, ships began moving. Not the big, powerful ships. Those stayed to defend Earth. Instead, the small ships came. The fast ships. The ugly, cobbled-together ships that no one expected to survive. Thousands of volunteers joined the mission. They knew the odds. They came anyway. Captain Shin Yoonji received the call on her hidden base. She gathered her Dakabi, her soldiers who had learned to fight like ghosts. They would drop onto Kepler 442b ahead of the fleet. They would prepare the ground. "We might not survive this," she told them. They smiled. They had stopped being afraid a long time ago. Commander Vekris received intelligence about the human fleet movement. She studied the numbers and felt something she had never felt before. It was not quite fear, but it was close. "They're coming," she reported to the Dominion. "They know they can't win, and they're coming anyway. Then destroy them." "I intend to," Vekris said. "But you should understand something. Every species we have ever conquered gave up when the odds became impossible. The humans know the odds better than anyone, and they're coming faster." She looked at the approaching fleet on her tactical display. "I don't think they care if they die. They only care if we die with them." The Battle of Kepler 442b was about to begin, and the galaxy was about to learn what humans really were. The Battle of Kepler 442b began at midnight. Commander Eunice stood on the bridge of the Guishan, watching the planet grow larger in the viewport. Purple forests and blue oceans. 3 small moons. Home, or what was left of it. The Kath had turned her colony into a fortress. Orbital platforms surrounded the planet like a necklace of death. 3 full battle groups patrolled the system. Ground bases covered every major city. The human fleet was outnumbered 20-1. "All ships, report status," Eunice said. One by one, the captains reported in. Their voices were calm. Too calm. They all knew what they were about to do. "This is Admiral Cho," came the old man's voice over the fleet channel. "I'm not going to give you a long speech. You know why we're here. You know what we're facing. And you came anyway." A pause. "Today, we take back what's ours. Today, we show the galaxy what happens when you attack humanity. Today, we go home." Another pause. "All ships, attack." The human fleet screamed toward the planet. The Kath detected them immediately and responded with devastating firepower. The first wave of human ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light. But the humans did not slow down. They flew in formation so tight that the Kath targeting systems could not track individual vessels. When one ship was destroyed, another took its place before the debris had cooled. They wove through enemy fire like water flowing around stones. The Kath had never seen anything like it. "They're insane," a Kath officer reported. "Their pilots are flying suicide courses. They're not even trying to survive." Commander Vekris watched the battle unfold on her tactical display. She had prepared for this moment. She had studied human tactics. She thought she was ready. She was wrong. The human ships reached the orbital platforms and attached themselves like parasites. Marines in powered armor built from scraps and determination, burned through airlocks and flooded into Kath stations. Private Beek Suji was 20 years old. She had been a university student 2 years ago, studying poetry. Now she carried a weapon that could punch through walls and a heart full of rage. She and her squad fought through the platform's corridors. Kath warriors were bigger, stronger, better armored. But they were used to enemies who retreated when things got hard. Suji did not retreat. None of the humans did. When her weapon ran empty, she picked up a Kath blade and kept fighting. When she was injured, she ignored the pain and kept moving. When her squad mates fell, she screamed their names and fought harder. The Kath defenders fell back. Not because they were losing the battle, they still had the numbers, but because they could not understand what they were facing. These small, soft creatures would not stop. They would not surrender. They kept coming no matter how many were killed. It was like fighting ghosts, fighting nightmares, fighting something that should not exist. On the planet's surface, Captain Shin Yoonji led her Dokkaebi out of hiding. They had landed 3 days before the main fleet. They had moved through the wilderness, avoiding Kath patrols, preparing the battlefield. Now they struck. Explosions ripped through Kath supply depots. Power stations went dark. Communication towers toppled. The Kath ground forces suddenly found themselves blind, deaf, and surrounded. Yoonji moved through the chaos like a dancer. She had done this so many times that it felt natural. Point, shoot, move. Point, shoot, move. Each motion was perfect. Each shot found its target. Behind her, her soldiers followed. They were not the same people who had fled into the forests a year ago. They had become something else. Something harder. Something that the Kath had never seen before. "This is Captain Shin," she broadcast to the fleet. "Ground defenses are breaking. Send the dropships." "Acknowledged," came Yuna's voice. "We're coming down." In orbit, the battle had reached a turning point. 12 hours of fighting had cost both sides dearly. The humans had lost 60% of their fleet. But the Kath had lost their orbital platforms. They had lost their defensive perimeter. They had lost control of the space around the planet. The human dropships fell through the atmosphere like meteors. Each one carried soldiers. Each soldier carried a lifetime of anger. Admiral Cho watched from his flagship, the Indomitable. The old ship was damaged, bleeding atmosphere from a dozen holes. It would not survive another major battle. But it did not need to. "Signal the fleet," Cho ordered. "All remaining ships, cover the landing zones. We hold until the ground forces are secure." "Sir, if we stay here, the Kath reinforcements will—" "I know what they'll do." "Give the order." The human fleet formed a wall between the landing zones and the approaching Kath reinforcements. They knew they could not win. They knew they were going to die. They stayed anyway. Ambassador Torin watched the battle from his observation station. His hands were shaking. His hearts were pounding. He had observed hundreds of conflicts during his long career, but he had never seen anything like this. The humans were winning. Against impossible odds, against superior technology, against an enemy that had never been beaten. They were winning. But that was not what disturbed him. What disturbed him was the cost. The humans were spending lives like currency. They were sacrificing ships and soldiers and friends without hesitation. Every victory was paid for in blood. And they were smiling. He could see their faces on the intercepted transmissions. Young faces, old faces, tired faces. And on every face, the same expression. Not fear, not despair. Joy. They were happy. Not because they were surviving, many of them were not going to survive, but because they were fighting. Because they were standing up. Because they were doing something that mattered. "I don't understand," Torin whispered. "Why are they happy to die?" His assistant Saren did not answer. She was watching the battle with the same horrified fascination. On the surface of Kepler 442b, Commander Yuna led her troops through the ruins of the city she had once called home. The streets she used to walk were filled with rubble. The buildings where she used to study were collapsed. The parks where she used to sit were burned and blackened. But she did not cry. She did not grieve. There would be time for that later. Right now, there was only the mission. "Push forward," she ordered. "The main Kath command post is 2 kilometers ahead. We take that, we take the planet." Her soldiers followed. They were exhausted, injured, running low on ammunition. But they kept moving. The Kath made a final stand at their command post. Commander Vecris herself led the defense. She was the best the Dominion had, and she was determined to stop the human advance. For 3 hours, the battle raged. Neither side gave ground. Bodies piled up in the streets. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of death. Then something happened that would echo across the galaxy. Vecris found herself facing Una in the ruins of a collapsed building. Both were exhausted. Both were wounded. Both had lost everything they cared about. For a moment, they stared at each other. Two warriors at the end of their strength. "Why?" Vecris asked. Her voice was harsh, confused. "You've already lost everything. Your fleet is destroyed. Your colony is in ruins. Why do you keep fighting?" Una smiled. It was the same smile that Admiral Cho had given, that Private Minho had given, that countless humans had given throughout the war. "Because that's what we do," she said. "We keep fighting. We keep hoping. We keep trying. Even when we lose, we don't stop. We never stop." "That's not logical." "No," Una agreed. "It's human." She raised her weapon. 16 hours after it began, the Battle of Kepler 442b ended. The Kath forces surrendered. Not all of them had wanted to. Many would have fought to the death. But Commander Vecris made the decision. She looked at the endless waves of humans, at their broken ships and bloodied soldiers, at their impossible determination. And she realized something. She could kill every human on this planet. She could destroy their fleet. She could burn their colonies to ash. And it would not matter. Because somewhere, more humans would rise up. More humans would fight. More humans would smile as they charged into certain death, knowing that their children would finish what they started. The war was over. The Kath had lost. Not because humans were stronger or smarter or better equipped, but because humans simply refused to give up. Admiral Cho accepted the Kath surrender on the bridge of the Indomitable. His ship was dying around him. He was dying to a wound in his side that the medics could not fix. But he was smiling. "We are not you," he told Vecris. "We will never be you. We do not fight for conquest. We do not fight for glory. We fight for our families, for our homes, for our future." He coughed, and blood stained his uniform. "Remember this day," he said. "Tell your people what you saw here. Tell them that humans are not like other species. We are stubborn. We are angry. We are dangerous." He leaned forward, and his eyes burned with the last fire of a dying star. But most importantly, he whispered, "We are not afraid." He died 3 hours later, surrounded by his officers. They buried him on Kepler 442b, in the soil of the world he had helped save. His grave marker was simple, with only a few words: Admiral Cho De-sung. He stood when others knelt. The galaxy would never forget what happened at Kepler 442b, and they would finally understand the fear. The war ended 3 years after it began. The final treaty was signed on Earth, in a city called Seoul. Representatives from the Kath Dominion sat across from human leaders in a room filled with cameras and history. The Kath looked smaller than they had before. Not physically, they were still giants, but something inside them had broken. They had never lost a war. They had never imagined it was possible. Now they knew. The treaty was simple. The Kath would withdraw from all human territory. They would return all prisoners. They would pay reparations for the damage they had caused. And they would never threaten humanity again. Some humans wanted more. They wanted revenge. They wanted to march on the Kath homeworld and burn it to the ground, the way the Kath had burned so many of their colonies. But Secretary General Han Jisu, the leader of United Humanity, made a different choice. "We are not them," she said. "We fought this war to protect our freedom not to become conquerors ourselves. Not everyone agreed, but enough people listened. The treaty was signed. The war was over. And then humanity did something that shocked the galaxy even more than their military victory. They helped their enemies. The Kath colonies were in ruins. The war had drained their resources, destroyed their fleets, broken their economy. Millions of Kath were starving. Their great dominion was falling apart. Human aid ships arrived before human warships had even returned home. They brought food, medicine, engineers, doctors. They helped rebuild cities that humans had destroyed. They treated wounds that humans had inflicted. Ambassador Torin watched the first human medical team land on a Kath world. He saw human doctors treating Kath patients. He saw human engineers working alongside Kath workers. He saw former enemies becoming something else. Not friends. Not yet. The wounds were too fresh for that. But something new. Something that had never existed in the galaxy before. I don't understand, Torin said to his assistant Saren. The Kath attacked them. Killed their people. Burned their worlds. And now humans are helping them? Saren did not answer for a long moment. She had been watching humans for a year now, trying to make sense of what she saw. I think, she said slowly, that humans are not what we thought they were. What do you mean? We saw their violence, their wars, their capacity for destruction, and we thought that was their nature. But I think we were wrong. She pulled up images on her display. Humans fighting, yes, but also humans building. Humans healing. Humans sacrificing themselves for strangers. Violence is not their nature, Saren said. It is their tool. They use it when they must. But when the fighting is over, they put it away and become something else. What? I don't know. I don't think there's a word for it in our language. Secretary General Han Jisu traveled to the Varani homeworld 5 years after the war ended. The coalition had finally sent an invitation. They wanted to talk about humanity joining their alliance. The meeting took place in a great chamber where 10,000 years of galactic history had been made. Species that had avoided humans for centuries now lined up to greet them. The Morth, the Deloni, the Sirathi, all of them looked at humans with new eyes. Ambassador Torin met Han at the entrance. He was old now, even by Volraine standards. He had spent the last years of his career trying to understand the species he had studied for so long. Secretary General, he said, welcome to Velran Prime. Han smiled. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes, but there was strength in her that Torin could feel from across the room. Thank you, Ambassador. I've heard a lot about you. And I about you. May I ask you something? Of course. I have spent my entire life studying your species. I thought I understood you. I was wrong. He paused, searching for the right words. Why did you fight? You could have surrendered. You could have saved millions of lives. Why did you choose war? Han was quiet for a moment. She looked around the great chamber, at the alien faces watching her, at the weight of history pressing down on this moment. Do you know what my grandmother used to tell me? She said finally. She grew up in a time when our country was occupied, when our language was forbidden, when our history was being erased. Torin nodded. He had read about this in the human records. She told me that there are things worth more than survival, that a life lived on your knees is not a life at all, that sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to stand up and fight, even when you know you might lose. And if you had lost, then we would have lost standing. The Kath would have taken our worlds, but they never would have taken us. Our children would have grown up with stories of parents who refused to break. And one day, those children would have risen up and finished what we started. Torin processed this for a long moment. His species had evolved past such emotions long ago, or so they had believed. Now he wondered if they had simply forgotten them. "There is something I must confess," he said. "My people were watching, not just during the war for centuries before it. We observed you, studied you, cataloged your every conflict. We called you primitives, savages, too violent to be worth contacting. He expected anger, outrage, demands for explanation. Instead, Han laughed. Of course you did. We are violent. We are savage. We've done terrible things to each other and to our world. But here's the thing about humans, Ambassador." She gestured to the chamber, to the gathered species, to the future that was being built in this moment. "We know what we are. We've looked into that darkness, and we've chosen to be better. Every single day, we wake up and make that choice again. It's not easy. It's not natural. But we do it anyway. Why? Because that's what makes us human." The ceremony was long and formal. Speeches were made. Documents were signed. Humanity officially joined the Galactic Coalition, not as a junior member, but as a full partner with equal voting rights. Admiral Park Yuna stood in the back of the chamber, wearing her dress uniform. She had been promoted 3 times since the war. She was the youngest admiral in human history. She had medals that she never wore and memories that she could not forget. Captain Shin Yunji stood beside her. The former guerrilla leader had retired from active combat, but she still trained new soldiers. She taught them to fight like Dakabi, to strike like ghosts, to never, ever give up. They watched Secretary General Han address the gathered species. "We did not ask for this war," Han said. "We did not want it. But when it came, we faced it the only way we knew how together, with everything we had, refusing to give up even when giving up would have been easier." She paused, her eyes sweeping across the chamber. "We are not the strongest species in this galaxy. We are not the oldest, or the wisest, or the most advanced. But we are stubborn. We are loyal. And we will never abandon those who need us. Some of you watched us fight the Kath and felt fear. I understand. We can be frightening when we need to be. But I want you to understand something else." Her voice softened. "That same fire that makes us dangerous makes us devoted. The same stubbornness that made us refuse to surrender makes us refuse to abandon our friends. The same rage that drove us to victory will drive us to defend every member of this coalition." She smiled, the tired, genuine smile of someone who had seen too much darkness and still believed in the light. "You watched us enter the fight. You finally understood the fear. But I hope, in time, you'll understand something else." She raised her hand in greeting, and across the chamber, humans and aliens alike raised theirs in return. Humanity doesn't just fight for ourselves. We fight for everyone who can't. That's who we are. That's who we've always been. And that's who we'll always be. The chamber erupted in applause. And somewhere, in the back of the room, Ambassador Torin felt something new stir in his old hearts. Not fear, hope. Years later, a memorial was built on Kepler 442b, a wall of names, thousands upon thousands, each one a life given in the war. Soldiers and civilians, young and old, rich and poor, all of them remembered. At the base of the wall, an inscription was carved in every language of the coalition. They watched humans enter the fight and finally understood the fear. Then they watched humans win the peace and finally understood the love. Admiral Park Yuna visited the memorial every year on the anniversary of the battle. She was old now, her hair gray, her body tired. But she still stood straight. She still remembered. She touched the wall, feeling the names beneath her fingers. Friends, comrades, people she had loved and lost. "We did it," she whispered. "We kept our promise." The wind blew through the purple forests of Kepler 442b. The three moons rose in the sky, and somewhere, in the vast darkness between stars, humanity continued to grow, to explore, to protect. They had faced the darkness and won, not because they were the strongest or the smartest or the best, but because they refused to give up, because they chose to be better, because they were human, and the galaxy would never forget.